what do you think some of the main differences are in growing up in the 70s and 80s and growing up today?
It's a different world. It's just a completely different world. Um, that was before computers. It was before email. It was before constant access to any kind of information. I mean, then if you were interested in something, you'd have to go to the library and look it up. There's just so much more capacity for learning now through, through the web. I think the world is much more connected. People, here, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can be connected to people all over the world. There's a constant transmission of what's going on around the world. You find out when something happens right away. Then it just wasn't like that. You really had to wait. And there were gatekeepers. Like I told you, like how important newscasters were. There were like people who, newscasters and other kinds of gatekeepers to knowledge. And things just took a lot longer. There's probably some, it's probably, a lot of negative to that. I don't ever remember feeling like I had so much to do. Of course, when I was in high school, sort of college, and in my first jobs, I felt the pressure of having work to do. But it just seems like these days, it's just been multiplied a number of times. There just seems to be like so many things you have to do all the time, and or things that you're missing, or things you're missing out on. It's just a lot more stimulus. Yeah.
How do you think education has changed?
Again, for the same reason, you're not as reliant on teachers in a way. You really learn things in so many different ways that sort of the one-to-one, having a teacher, when I was growing up and when I was studying, you really needed teachers that was your one way of finding out certain information. You couldn't find it out on your own, or it would just be much, much harder. Does that make sense?
Yes.
One thing too that is very, very different. I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain this, but when I was young, and when I was, a young teen, and when I was in college, I always felt young. I felt young. I felt like, one day I would kind of grow up, and in terms of like power or authority, I just kind of always felt, that there was somebody sort of, more experienced, that had more authority, I guess. And it's funny, with the computer age, suddenly the world seemed like at some point when I was like sort of in my early 30s, maybe late, early 30s, it sort of seemed like the world shifted to then suddenly all the young people were running the world, like suddenly, there were all these really young people who were changing the world in such a way that, and I think it has changed. I don't think that people have the same sort of respect and reliance and dependency on older people now in a way that it was. That was the case, when I was growing up. Older people had it. They were the ones with all the experience, all the money, all the it was like they were grown-ups. There was this idea of a grown-up that I think is gone now. I think now, there's your age or, young people, like, they think nothing of a 20-year-old, even younger, like, changing the world, through some computer, some program that they've discovered, or not just that, but, in other ways. It's just age is not is not anymore so closely aligned with capacity and experience. And I think it's a very different, world because of it. I was much less aware of what's going on in the world. Like some questions that you've asked me about what I thought about sort of all these different things in the 70s. Kids, I just don't think kids thought about things that way. We weren't told about it necessarily. We didn't know about it so much. Whereas, young people now, because of how interconnected people are through the internet and other ways, you're much more aware of what's happening.
So in contrast to this, what do you think some of the biggest problems were with America in the 70s and the 80s in relation to problems today?
A lot of the same problems. I mean, racism, lack of opportunity, our government not always doing the most charitable or most with as much long-term vision as should be employed in dealing with things. I mean, it's sort of the same issues. I'm not even sure it's necessarily gotten much better. I guess it's just changed. It's just a different form now.
What was your favorite part, just in general, about everything growing up in the 70s, 80s?
Well, I love music. One thing when I think about my growing up, when I was a teen, when I was in high school, I had a lot of freedom. I mean, I just really had a lot of freedom, and very few expectations, which is very liberating. And I'm not sure that kids today have the same kind of feeling. And what else? I don't know. I mean, overall, I think things have gotten much better, and there's so much more potential for impacting the world and connecting with other people and building different communities. I mean, all of that is just so much easier now. So in general, I kind of think things are a lot better.
If you were to choose one event or new idea or movement that occurred in the 70s that is still important now, what would you choose?
That existed then. Like, give me an example. I don't understand the question.
Well, it's an important event that occurred that really shaped the 70s as a whole and just impacted America or the world in an important way.
I have to think about that. I'm not sure. I think one of the things, I don't forget when it was, late 70s, early 80s, was the birth of the first IVF baby. That's really changed the world. People are just having kids so much later now, because of the possibility of that technology. That's really changed things. And what was her name? Louise, I think her name was Louise Brown or something. I remember it was a very big deal. I think it was in the early 80s. One thing, oh, this maybe was earlier than the 70s. But one thing I always think about is after the Vietnam War, the U.S. government really helped its veterans. Two big programs were one, sending them to school, and two, very, very low interest rates for buying houses. And I have a number of friends, including Dan, my ex's parents. That's how they were able to buy their first house, and it really launched them into a very solid sort of upper middle class lifestyle. And I think that was true for a lot of people of that generation, and that doesn't. I just don't think that happens anymore. I don't think vets get. I just think veterans get that right now, and instead, you come out of the military, and my perception is that you're really in trouble. It's hard to find jobs. It's hard, and also, and this is a very big deal actually. I professionally, after I ended up going to law school, and I was a union lawyer. Unions in the 70s were extremely powerful, and they really built the middle class in this country. And through the 70s and 80s, they were decimated. I mean, a lot by. I remember when this was a very big deal in the early 80s. Ronald Reagan, the air traffic controllers went on strike, and he basically broke that union, and it never recovered, and that was sort of the start of this sort of decimation of unions in this country, and the middle class has really suffered as a result. And there just aren't those kinds of jobs anymore. Union jobs promised not only a good wage, but a pension. Nobody has pensions anymore. Now, and, in the 70s also, you went to work for someone, and for a lot of people in this country, they stayed with the same employer for their whole careers, and their employers provided a retirement plan, and that's just gone. It's now, there's a lot of, big companies hire people on a part-time basis, and there's a lot of people who have to have several part-time jobs, and people have part-time, they're only given part-time work so that they don't get benefits at all. With the Affordable Care Act, we're sort of starting to rebuild a bit of that sort of structure for the middle class, but I think the 70s were sort of like the start of sort of the devastation of the middle class in this country.
So, lastly, besides the arming of the Contras in Nicaragua, did you ever protest any other political controversies?
Yes. When I was in law school, I went to law school a few years later. I didn't go right after college. Dan and I, my ex, him, we spent a lot of time in Central America, and I did some other work. But when I did go to law school, I was in law school from 1989 to 91, and the United States at that time the United States was also arming Contras and supporting oppressive governments all throughout Central America, and I actually protested in front of an army, what do you call it?
Base?
Not a base, but where they get kids to go and join
Recruitment
up.
center?
Recruitment center, and was arrested. Yeah. And I protested our initial entry into Iraq, our bombing of Iraq in Manhattan. You were there. You don't remember, but you were a little baby in 2001. I guess I don't do that anymore. But yeah, I I guess my sort of that experience in the early years. I mean, you know, it was college. I went to Berkeley, which had been a place where there was a lot of student activism in the 60s. And a lot of my professors were, you know, involved with that and really supported teaching students to be active, responsible members of society and to voice dissatisfaction when we didn't approve of what was going on.
Thank you, Ms. Bravo, for doing this interview.
It was fun.